All right, let's talk about the Titanic. And no, I'm not talking about the movie. We're going to treat this like a real deal case study, the kind you'd see in a professional briefing. Because honestly, this isn't just some old story. The lessons learned from this one single disaster, well, they're the reason you do your job the way you do today.
So picture it, April 14th, 1912. The so-called unsinkable RMS Titanic goes down on its very first trip. And yeah, it was a massive tragedy. Over 1,500 people lost their lives. But for us, for mariners, it's so much more than that. This single event is basically the origin story for modern maritime safety. You know, SOLAS, the IMO, all of that stuff we live by, it all starts right here, in the ice-cold waters of the North Atlantic.
Okay, so how on earth did this happen? Well, big accidents like this almost never have just one single cause. It's usually a bunch of smaller things, a series of little failures that all line up just right. You've probably heard of the Swiss cheese model, right? Well, long before anyone spotted an iceberg, the holes in the cheese were already aligning for the Titanic. And here are some of those holes. On their own, maybe they don't seem like deal breakers, but you put them all together, it's a recipe for absolute disaster. First, you've got this incredible overconfidence. I mean, the ship was unsinkable, right? So why sweat the small stuff? Then there's the speed. They were pushing it, trying to make good time even though they were getting ice warnings. But back then, those warnings were seen more like friendly advice, not a command to slow down. And get this, no one, not the crew, not the passengers, had ever done a full lifeboat drill. Oh, and the lookouts? The guys in the crow's nest whose whole job was to spot danger? They didn't have any binoculars. Each one of those is a slice of Swiss cheese, just waiting to line up. Now, this right here, this is just unbelievable. It really shows you how bad the communication breakdown was. Less than an hour before the collision, another ship, the SS Californian, is literally stopped in an ice field nearby. They try to radio the Titanic a warning, and the response from Titanic's wireless operator? Shut up, I am busy. Can you imagine? Now, it's easy to just blame the operator, but it was really a system failure. See, he actually worked for Marconi, the radio company, not the ship's line. His main job was sending passenger telegrams. That's how he got paid. There was no clear rule that said a safety message from another ship was top priority. A total failure of what we'd now call bridge resource management. So the problems weren't just about human error. They were literally built right into the ship. The steel they used for the hull, look, it was the best you could get back then, but it had this major hidden flaw. It was full of impurities, like sulfur, that made it incredibly brittle in cold water. So when it hit that iceberg in the freezing North Atlantic, the steel didn't bend or buckle like modern steel would. Nope, it shattered. It was basically like hitting a sheet of glass. The very skin of the ship was its biggest weakness. And just take a look at this. This shows you the difference up close, I mean at a microscopic level. On the left, that's modern steel. See how fine and tight the grain is? And on the right, that's a sample from the Titanic's hull. Look how coarse and chunky it is. That's the brittleness right there. This is exactly why the iceberg didn't just leave a dent or a scrape. It literally caused the hull plates and the rivets to pop and fracture, opening up the ship like a can opener. So all those hidden problems, the speed, the ignored warnings, that brittle steel, they've all lined up. The stage is perfectly set for a disaster. Now we get to the moment it all goes wrong. The point of no return, the critical decisions made on the bridge that sealed the ship's fate. Okay, here's how it went down. 11:35 p.m., the call comes from the crow's nest. Iceberg right ahead. On the bridge, First Officer Murdoch reacts instantly. Engines full astern, helm hard a starboard. But it's just too late. That ship has way too much momentum. For what must have felt like an eternity, 37 seconds to be exact, they just had to watch this mountain of ice get closer and closer. And then contact. It wasn't some huge crash like you see in the movies. It was more of a long, sickening, grinding noise along the starboard side. Just minutes later, Captain Smith and the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, are down below assessing the damage, and the terrible truth sinks in. By 5 past midnight, the order is given. Get the lifeboats ready. And this is the fatal wound. This is the design flaw that doomed the ship. See, the Titanic was designed to be incredibly safe. It could stay afloat even if 4 of its forward compartments were completely flooded, an amazing feat of engineering for the time. But the iceberg,
it opened up 5. And the ship's designer, who was on board, knew instantly what that meant. The watertight bulkheads, the walls between the compartments, they didn't go all the way up to the top deck. So as the bow started to sink, water would just spill over the top of one bulkhead into the next one, and then the next one, and so on. Think of it like filling an ice cube tray. Once it started, there was no stopping it. The ship sinking wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a mathematical certainty.
So let's pause here for a second. Put yourself on that bridge. The designer has just told you your unsinkable ship has maybe 2 hours left, best case scenario. You have more than 2,200 souls on board. What do you do first? What are your top priorities right now? How do you keep panic from taking over? Seriously, think about it. This is the ultimate nightmare scenario for any mariner.
All right, so what happened next? The response, the evacuation. This is where the really big lessons for us come from. And these aren't just lessons written down in some dusty old report. They're written in steel, in the regulations and the procedures that all of us live by every single day out on the water.
To put it bluntly, the evacuation was a total shambles, a disaster within a disaster. There was no plan for a full-scale evacuation. Most of the crew had no idea which lifeboat they were assigned to, and a lot of them had never even lowered one before. The result? Pure chaos. The very first lifeboat they launched, which could hold 65 people, left with only 27. 27. This absolute failure to prepare, to drill, to plan, it's a huge reason why 1,500 people never made it off that ship.
And this table here, it connects the dots perfectly. You can draw a straight line from every major failure on the Titanic to a regulation we all follow today. There weren't enough lifeboats? Boom, now SOLS says you need lifeboat space for every single person on board. A nearby ship had its radio turned off for the night? Now we have a mandatory 24/7 radio watch thanks to GMDS. The evacuation was a chaotic mess? That's why we have mandatory muster drills for passengers and crew. They steamed right into a known ice field, and that is exactly why the International Ice Patrol was created. Every single one of these rules, rules that save lives today, was bought and paid for by this tragedy. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that every single safety rule in our book, every procedure we follow is there for a reason. And that reason was usually a tragedy. When you're running a passenger muster drill and it feels like a pain, remember the chaos on the Titanic's boat deck. When you slow down for an ice warning, you're doing what her captain should have done. Think about it. Every safety check you do is like a shield against the ghosts of the past. And we have to remember that. Because the most dangerous thing out there, the one hazard that will never ever show up on your radar, is complacency.